everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think most of you know me already, but my name's Amy Foster. I'm with the engineering department. I'm the city's stormwater coordinator. And you're probably wondering why you're here. Hey. All right, I'm Amy Foster. I'm the city's stormwater coordinator. I'm in the engineering department down the hall. You're probably wondering why you're here. So I'll give you a little bit of background. The reason that you're here is because you're a very important part of protecting water quality within Coralville. And when I say water quality, I'm not talking about drinking water. I'm talking about the Iowa River, Biscuit Creek, Muddy Creek, Clear Creek, and you're out and about the town. So this presentation is to show you what illicit discharges look like. Most of you probably know, but all the storm drains in town are connected to the nearest creek or river. So anything that's on the road or has potential to go down the storm drain can hit the river. And you might think that that doesn't happen a lot, but it really does. I've seen some really bizarre things, out just checking on construction sites. Obviously, muddy water is a common pollutant that gets into the storm drain, but also things like concrete washout. There's been times that I ran into degreaser that was power wash down the storm drain, slurry. Same thing as concrete washout. We had a tar spill one time, and this is tar that you would spray on like a gravel drive or gravel lot to keep the dust down. But there was a large spill that nobody might have noticed. It was kind of in a back area of town. So this is to help us by educating you to call these things in if you see them. So JB is going to talk a little bit about the history of the stormwater program, what some of the city's requirements are that have been handed down from EPA and DNR to us, and then show some pictures of things you might see, and then talk with you a little bit about what to do if you do see them. All right, so this is JB. He's with FHU, and he's been in the stormwater world for a long time. And he's a great asset to help us learn about these techniques and notice concerns out in the field.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here this morning. Let me get this situated here real quick. Make sure I'm doing this right.
And we like to try to keep this informal, so if you have any questions along the way, please raise your hand or speak up, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them for you.
Yeah, if we start sounding too professional, just let us know real quick, and we'll change directions real fast. Thanks for coming this morning. We had a 7:30 start yesterday morning on a Monday, so they were our guinea pigs for this presentation. You guys got to sleep in. We appreciate that. You are in one of America's 100 best small towns. We'll get to that here in a second, but you're kind of a big deal. That's me. I'm with Felsberg, Holt, and Ullevig. We're primarily like a transportation engineering firm, but we also do environmental and stormwater management services. My background is I spent 12 years in the public sector. I was a stormwater specialist for the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District in Lincoln. That's a mouthful. When we worked hand in hand with the city of Lincoln on their stormwater program. So that was my background, and then I jumped to the private sector about 3 years ago. I've known Amy for a lot of years. We've been on a committee together through the International Erosion Control Association, and that is as glamorous as it sounds, absolutely. Thanks for spending some time today. Hopefully everybody got some snacks or a donut before we get going. He's going the right direction. All right. Yeah, you're kind of a big deal here in Coralville. I don't know if you knew that or not. Livability.com back in 2015 said you guys are one of the top 100 small towns for livability in America, number 59. We were having a running argument as to whether this was a Pella picture or if this was Coralville yesterday, but I think we figured out it actually is Coralville based on some of the landmarks down there. So I was looking up the term livability when I was kind of putting this together because I think Amy feels the same way. livability is one of these buzzwords, and not everybody really kind of understands what that is, but it's sort of an all-encompassing kind of term. And there's a lot of things that go into making a livable community. And Coralville obviously has a lot of those assets, and you're making big investments into making your community as strong and as livable as you can. But I think stormwater management and clean water in general is one of those things that goes into that livability equation. And we'll kind of talk through what that looks like, and hopefully you guys come up to think maybe the same thing at the end of the presentation. We're going to talk about maybe a day in the life of a stormwater coordinator. It's a pretty glamorous life. We'll kind of walk through what that looks like. Why stormwater? Why we do this. We'll talk about Coralville's clean water commitment and various aspects of the program itself. And then some takeaways for what you guys can do to help us out in the field, out in your day-to-day lives, and then help us spread the message at the end of the day. So, a day in the life. It's not every community who has a stormwater program has a dedicated stormwater coordinator like an Amy. It's a lot of times it's piecemealed together. It might be 10% of somebody's job here, 10% of somebody's job there. But make no mistake, when you put all of these things together and to coordinate it, it's a full-time job. So it might start off 7:30, like yesterday we had a presentation here at 7:30, but in this case we had a pre-construction meeting to discuss a biocell construction and the inspections and requirements that go with that. A lot of coordination that has to happen, especially with Coralville's new post-construction stormwater program. We'll touch on that in a little bit. And then we had a rain event last night in our theoretical scenario here, and the phone rang, obviously, and a citizen called in about muddy runoff coming from a townhome development. Anybody, obviously there's a fair amount of construction going on in Coralville right now, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Townhome developments are pretty unique. So Amy or myself, we might go out and take a look at one of these complaints, and we're usually starting at a discharge point off of the site, and we're going to take a look and see what's leaving the site. And whenever I see, chocolate milk kind of running down the street, that's usually not a very good thing. But we sort of get immune to it a little bit in some of our Midwest areas, in our urban settings, because this is, that's the way a creek has always looked in our minds for some reason. But when you get back up into the townhome development itself, this phase of construction, we've got our streets, our infrastructure is in, and now we're building vertically. We're building the townhomes, and we're not just building one unit at a time in a townhome development. We're building 10, 20, and we've got contractors and subcontractors just on top of one another. It's the Wild West out there, and there's very, very little that I can see in this picture where we're controlling any of this fill, this sediment, and it is all running out into the street and running away. And you saw where it was going. So that's the process that we might go through. We'll have a conversation with an engineer, maybe a developer, a contractor, and say, what's your plan now? Because we can't let it go like this. 11:30 comes around, and we're making the rounds, and we want to check out a rain garden that was put in on a residential property. This was a cost-shared rain garden in this instance that was funded probably 50-50, maybe with your stormwater program. Very common now in the Midwest. A lot of communities are having cost-share programs to encourage this type of of practice. We're trying to promote rainwater infiltration, and that's the paradigm shift that's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years across the Midwest. We're trying to move away from so much of our traditional pipe and gutter systems, and we're trying to figure out a way to mimic the natural hydrology of our area as it was before we developed the land. So rain garden is something that we might see on a residential property. Our day moves on. And we've got at 1:30, we've got erosion and sediment control basics training for home builders. We'll have another session right in here, this same presentation today at 1:30. But this is a typical day. 3:30, call comes in. We've got an illicit discharge investigation for a wet concrete washout. So a contractor has he's washed out the chute on his truck, back a curb, and then a little bit out in the actual street itself, and he tried to conspicuously just hose it down the storm drain. And we've got a little bit of an issue with that when we've got that wet concrete slurry, that not necessarily the heavy stuff that's actually going to end up being the foundation or the road, but that washout water, that diluted runoff, it carries a very, very high pH to the tune of about 12 or 13. Somewhere, we want it around 6 or 7. But when we have pH like that and it enters a water body, a stream or a lake, it really sets things out of whack. Not to even mention all of the other contaminants that are in that slurry mix as it goes down. So this is something that we have real concerns about. We do a lot of education with contractors to prevent these types of scenarios from happening. We want to have secondary containment on sites, but a very common sight out there, unfortunately. Our day moves on. Amy's out here. This is Coral Ridge Avenue. Am I saying that right? All right. And we've got a meeting out there for post-construction stormwater improvements. They're going to be doing some monitoring of a lot of these bioretention cells and these rain gardens that are actually in the right-of-way of the road, in the medians and in the roadside ditches, and they're going to check and see how these things are working, how much infiltration is actually happening down through there. We wrap up our day with a city council meeting, and the mayor is receiving a Water Quality Leadership Award in front of council. And that is something that actually happened not too long ago. So there's a lot of encouraging things that have come out of this program here in Coralville, and there's a lot to be commended for. So very cool. So Amy kind of gave you the backstory as to why you're actually here in the room with us. I want to give you the backstory. I want to go back a little bit further and go, why is this even a thing? Why, what would you say we're doing this for? And it really started back post-war, post-World War II, a lot of industrial activity. We had converted all of our large factories that had gone into military production, assembly line production, and we had a lot of industrial happening, a lot of building, a lot of manufacturing, but that came with a trade-off. We were prospering as a nation, but the trade-off was, we were really taxing a lot of our infrastructure and a lot of our natural resources. This is the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio. And the Cuyahoga had the uncanny ability to catch on fire. And when you have to call the fire department to put out the river, that inherently is a bit of a problem. So you never want to see that. If you can avoid that, that's not some signage you want to have along your rivers. So they talked about the Cuyahoga. It was a river that oozed rather than flowed. And there's a lot of problems that were disposed of in the river and never found again, that kind of thing. So in 1972, they created, in the Nixon administration, after a lot of back and forth, it was a bipartisan solution. They created the Environmental Protection Agency, and out of that came the Clean Water Act. And it was really focused on industrial sources of pollution, these point sources of pollution, these end-of-pipe types of discharges. And they were really, the program was good. It was effective. The initial goals of the Clean Water Act were, we want to have fishable, swimmable, drinkable waters by 1985. How'd we do? Came up a little short. What they didn't really factor in, while they made great strides for industrial activity, they didn't factor in a lot of non-point sources of pollution. So non-point source pollution is these more diffuse sources of pollution. These sheet flows, these diluted flows, and in the urban setting, this is kind of what we're talking about. You've got a lot of rooftops, you've got a lot of streets, you've got a lot of parking lots. You know, we design our, you know, if you're familiar, you guys have had some flooding around here, so this might not be a term that misses the mark here, but we design our parking lots to accommodate the 100-year shopping event. You know, if we design our parking lots for the big day, Black Friday every year, we get a lot of impervious surface. Historically, that water went down into and recharged the groundwater table, the vast majority of it. Pre-settlement, we had no problems with a lot of our waterways and our natural resources. When we come in and we do developments like this, we alter the entire thing. So we've got systems like this in the lower right-hand corner that are to accommodate every drop of water that you see on this rooftop, on this parking lot, and there's not a lot of room, not a lot of accommodation, any accommodation for that matter, for actual water quality. How can we make this water a little bit better? You've got similar scenarios here. You're no different than any other community. I will say you're different in the sense that with your post-construction stormwater program, which I'll touch on in a little bit, you're making great strides in making the functionality of these systems a little bit better from a water standpoint. And they don't make great habitat either. The urban goose has tried to adapt and improvise, but he still kind of misses the mark here. But he tries. With all of that water now that used to either infiltrate into the soil, evapotranspire up into the atmosphere, we've got this tremendous volume of water, this increased volume of water in our urban settings. And therefore we have streams that have to adapt and try to find their equilibrium, if you will. And so we have these really intense periods of rain. We have flashy streams that come up really fast, they rise really fast, they fall really fast. And we have deep eroding banks on our streams, incised channels, very unstable scenarios. We lose a lot of soil and sediment that ends up in our lakes, our creeks, and eventually down into river systems in Gulf of Mexico from bed and bank erosion. And that's really because we're altering the landscape so much that it has to improvise. Case in point, this would usually, you know, in a more natural setting, we'd never see something like this. But this urban channel, we've got 8-foot banks, and look how much flow we have down through there in just a regular sunny day. Very, very little. So that gives you an idea of how much volume has to come in there to create a creek channel that looks like that. And those are things that really sort of tax the municipalities, maybe soil and water conservation districts who have to go in there and find solutions, not only work with landowners, but then work to try to find solutions to do repairs. This is somebody's property over here, I'm sure, and that's not going to heal itself a lot of times. So we've got to come in there and spend some money to do repairs. The grand scheme of things, obviously we lie in the Mississippi River Basin. Iowa City, Coralville, we're in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And also, obviously, agriculture has a tremendous contribution to our water quality issues as well, especially in Iowa. We're the most altered landscape, really, in the United States from that standpoint, as far as drainage goes. It all ends up down in the Gulf of Mexico. Here we are down by St. Louis. We got the Missouri River on the left coming in, the Mississippi on the right. You can see that my contribution over there in Nebraska is not the greatest to the problem. We've got an issue too. So it all ends up down here in the Gulf of Mexico. Just to orient you, you're looking at New Orleans right here. This is Lake Pontchartrain. And then any given day out here, roughly an area the size of the state of Connecticut, is an area known as the dead zone. It's an area where we have a condition called hypoxia. We have all this sediment, all the sediment that's come from farm fields, urban development, bed and bank erosion from our stream channels. It's carrying with it a lot of nutrients, a lot of bacteria. And as those nutrients start to break down, they'll come out, they'll cause tremendous algae blooms, and as that algae dies off, it robs the area of oxygen. And we have very, very unhealthy areas that do not really sustain quality of life in there for those aquatic organisms. We have a real problem down there. It's the second largest dead zone in the world. And so there's a lot of attention being put on how we lessen the impacts that are happening down there in the Gulf Coast. We see these types of things happen all the time down there. And more locally, you see it manifest itself in local areas, urban areas, and some of our local lakes and rivers. We see these types of things. We have algae blooms. So a lot of times they can be toxic algae. We see no contact signage posted. We've seen it out at Lake McBride very frequently. You see these types of things. You hear about, animals passing away, getting very sick. We hear about humans getting sick because of these no contact rules that they're not applying. These are not pictures from somewhere else. These are Iowa photos. This is where we have fish kills when we have those types of conditions, these toxic conditions. And so we recognize that while we're not the entire part of the problem, we definitely have a role to play in water quality, and especially your own community. Talked a little bit about different scenarios with regards to land use and how that equates to runoff. If we have a natural setting, undeveloped, we've got well over 50% infiltration that's happening. And then a lot of it is through evapotranspiration, that water that rain that's collected on vegetation that evaporates, and very little runoff. Conversely, when we develop out, let's say we're on the Coralville Strip down here, where we have 75 to 100% impervious surface, virtually no infiltration is happening. It's a lot of runoff, a little bit more evapotranspiration, but mainly it's runoff. So you can see the difference in the volume and how these streams have to adapt. And in those streams, you've got aquatic life that's also having to adapt, or it's gone. And a lot of times we don't see good biodiversity in those streams anymore. It just doesn't happen. So a lot of what this stormwater program does for Coralville is all about sort of trying to change behaviors in a lot of different settings. Both you personally as homeowners, as residents in the community, but also land use decisions that happen in this room on a regular basis, as well as educating the development community, educating our own staff and a lot of their practices of everyday use of things that happen in their job. We talk about non-point sources of pollution. They're all sort of diffuse sources, but there are some, I guess, sources of pollution that we recognize in our everyday lives. Things like this. We wouldn't necessarily put two and two together a lot of times when we're washing our car and we're soaping it up right out there in the driveway. It's different than, washing a sink full of dishes, as that's going to a sanitary sewer. As Amy said, that storm drain system is not getting treated anywhere. So all of your soapy water that you're using to wash up your car, it's down the storm drain. And we're trying to maybe change that mindset a little bit. A common occurrence this time of year, and as we get into busier months here, is track out onto residential streets, busy thoroughfares. This is something that would make my phone ring immediately when I was doing my job back in Lincoln. I know it was the same with Amy. It's educating those drivers, educating those people going in and out of these construction sites to just have a little bit different mindset. A developer who refuses to do what the rules say he's got to do for developments. This is a residential development with virtually no controls in place. Our infrastructure is all in place. That's all going really in one place after it clogs up that entire storm drain system. But we want to try to get these areas green. We want to try to get these things stabilized as much as possible. We want to try to prevent the erosion process from happening if at all possible. All the way down to, after we've cleaned out our paintbrushes, what are we doing with our washout? Hopefully not this. Again, we laugh about these things, but these are more common than not, unfortunately. And so, we'll have some takeaways here at the end, and hopefully you guys can help spread the message a little bit. A stormwater program is basically an easier way to say what the regulations call it is an MS4 program. Coralville is a designated small municipal separate storm sewer system. It does not have a combined sewer system. Some communities deal with that, and they're going through the process of doing sewer separation, where we've got stormwater systems that are going into sanitary, and it overflows and it overwhelms the treatment system, and then we're putting raw sewage into the adjacent stream. Fortunately, Coralville doesn't have a system like that. So they have an MS4 permit that is issued from Iowa DNR. It starts obviously with the Clean Water Act, like we talked about. EPA administers that responsibility at the state level to Iowa Department of Natural Resources. They issue all these MS4 permits to communities greater than 10,000 in population. And then those communities put together a stormwater management plan to say, here's how we're going to meet the conditions of that permit in 6 different minimum control measures. And they'll also do it through ordinances, things like a construction stormwater ordinance, post-construction stormwater ordinance, illicit discharges, things of that nature. And obviously staff and resources go to implementing the actual program itself. So the 6 controls in the MS4 program are public education and outreach, public involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction stormwater management, sometimes referred to as pre-construction, post-construction stormwater management, that's after everything's built, and now we're trying to manage that stormwater in perpetuity. And then the last one is municipal pollution prevention and good housekeeping. And that's sort of the practices for a lot of you guys. And our training today is sort of lumped into that last one, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for our municipal facilities. So we'll just hit the highlights of some of these. For education and outreach, we've got a lot of resources that Coralville is utilized. Periodic articles and information that gets put into the Connection publication. They've teamed up with other communities like Iowa City and some other organizations to do an Iowa River cleanup. Every year there's a wet and muddy day, and these are some junior high students that are out there at the Iowa River landing out in the wetland, and they're pulling some invasive species out of there and getting the place to look the way it needs to. Public involvement is a big one, and you guys are going through a lot of that for the West development process. You really have a vested interest in how that looks moving forward, and it's very important to have public involvement through all of this. There was a well-coordinated effort for public involvement when you were going through the post-construction stormwater ordinance process and how that was going to look and how it was going to impact the community, impact the development community. A lot of considerations go into that. That's the public involvement process. Illicit discharge, detection, and elimination. Essentially, we want only stormwater to go down the storm drain. You've probably seen those stamps, or you've seen the little discs that get glued to the storm drains, stenciling, this is only rain down the storm drain. We take that seriously because we see a lot of times that other people are sort of ignoring that advice. Like I said, concrete washout is a big one, especially as development continues. That's a really easy source of pollution to sort of let slip, but it's very important that we catch that. It can really impact adjacent water bodies. This is pretty much a buried area right here between not only sediment that's gotten in there, but you can see that gray color. That's that concrete washout that's in suspension in that water, and that's going to cause a real problem. Here's another example of concrete washout, and this is sort of on the construction stormwater side of things. We might have a builder who's, and this is a Coralville example, by the way. We've got somebody who's decided to get back to work, but he's poured a foundation, and they want to get that water out of there. But why would we treat any standing water that's sediment laden any different than this pile of dirt right here, where we've got a lot of best management practices to try to capture and keep that sediment on site? What makes that any different than what's sitting in that basement? I know that guy wants to get back to work, but when we're just pumping straight sediment laden water down to the curb, that getting treated anywhere? No, it's right on down. And we have it's not so much maybe the volume of the sediment in there, but that is, that's pure sediment-laden water. And when that hits an adjacent water body, that can be significant. When I see lakes and ponds that look like this, I don't have to be a genius to figure out if the colors match. I've probably got a source right there, right? And it's the cumulative effect that we're trying to really stress and take home here. I can't let one slip just because it's one point, one source of pollution over here, one home. I have to take it and look at it from the total picture here. Some other examples, common examples of illicit discharges. Sometimes car washes are notorious. The drain that's inside that car wash bay does hook up to a sanitary sewer. That's a rule. But when it slips out, a lot of times, you've got a different setup right here at the entrance or the exit of the bay, and it's not catching all of that. That's an issue. They're going to have to figure that out to try to capture a lot of that soapy water that's getting away down the storm drain. We've got grease coming from a restaurant. Looks like we had a bit of a spill here. That's getting away. We don't want that. This is a local one, and this is a subtle one. You wouldn't normally catch this. And some of you might recognize maybe the building where we're looking at. There is an adjacent pond back here, actually a popular fishing pond back here, and we've power washed this because we're going to basically repaint the fire lane, okay? I get that, but where did we power wash all the paint to? We didn't get rid of it, did we? We just kind of let her go. And where's it going to end up? In our fishing pond. Just little subtle things where we just have to kind of flip the switch and have people sort of make the connection. Now we've got another step there that we've got to do, and we've got to get that cleaned up. I'm harping on concrete washout because I think it's a big issue, and I think we're going to hear more and more about that as we go. So from a municipal standpoint, we're going to be talking a lot to Public Works and street maintenance and some of the things that they do, just as standard type of operating procedures is taking into consideration things like this. You can also get this from wet concrete saw cutting, to do a repair job. And you see that wet slurry going down the storm drain, and it sort of stains that curb a lot of times you could see where it was and running down. That's the kind of things we're trying to educate people on. And you see stuff like this. A lot of times back of restaurants, grease catchments that aren't getting maintained in a timely manner, and it all gets away. Okay, this is construction stormwater issues. Probably the most common thing you see out here. You're going to keep seeing it because we're going to keep building, we're going to keep developing the community, and it's just a matter of trying to do it the right way and have conscientious builders who are trying to do it the cleanest way possible. Here's Amy out there. She's done it for a lot of years. both here, both in Davenport, out there in the dead of winter, doing a little inspection work. And again, back to those, one house, one site can be a big source of pollution. And again, it's that cumulative effect. A lot of time that I spend, I do a lot of presentations and I do a lot of education specifically on construction stormwater. We spend a lot of time educating folks on the differences between erosion control and sediment control. You can't always do one as effectively as the other sometimes. A lot of times in the middle of construction, you'll only see sediment control, and that is the erosion process has already happened. Now we're just trying to capture it and keep it on as much on our site as possible. So this is silt fence. You've seen it. You see, I think I was talking to somebody last night. I'm like, I think they grow silt fence here. There's a lot of it around, and a lot of it that doesn't get taken out after the fact sometimes. But we're trying to capture it, and we're trying to promote sedimentation on site, not out here, not out down the street, taking a left turn into maybe an apartment complex parking lot that buries it in 2 to 3 inches of mud, like this did before this was in here. And then we're trying to show them this is erosion control. We're actually preventing that raindrop impact from happening, preventing that raindrop from hitting that bare soil over here. We're covering it up. This is what we're trying to promote the most of, and trying to make that paradigm shift out there. The more we have exposed, the more risk we have, and the harder it is to contain all of it. So we really try to promote erosion control through using erosion control blankets, straw mulch, hydro seeding, hydro mulching. You'll see out there a lot of times. There's a lot of different techniques for doing it. So we spend a lot of time educating folks on that. Post-construction stormwater, again, you guys are doing a ton of this around the city. And we're trying to improve the water quality of runoff that's generated by impervious surfaces on a site after construction. These are going to be in place, like I said, in perpetuity. And it could be something as simple as a residential rain guard, or you could have a really complex multi-practice type of system, like a treatment train. This is actually in Dubuque. They actually have some issues with a combined sewer, and that overflows in even modest rain events. And so they're trying to lessen the contribution to that system from stormwater by promoting infiltration. This is their Green Alleys project. They're trying to convert their entire downtown alley grid to pervious pavement. These are pervious paver blocks. They promote rain, they just soak it up like a sponge. Low traffic areas, they can sort of take the weight. They're showing a demonstration of a product here that can sort of clean that system out if it gets clogged or something like that. Very cool system. This is your park just north of Interstate 80. You got a green roof system out there, one of the first ones of its kind in the state, really, and it's a beautiful, beautiful building. And we're really trying to promote, again, infiltrating and capturing and using that plant life to capture and treat the small storm events. When we get a bigger event, it's going to fill up, it'll bypass, and it'll go out just like a normal system would. But for the smaller events, very little leaves the rooftop. Von Maur was a very big project for the stormwater program here, and there's a lot of lessons learned. We're still learning a ton of stuff with post-construction, how to dial it in right. We're just in the early stages of this type of technology, especially in the Midwest. So there's a lot of lessons learned, both from the city standpoint, but the design community out there who've only designed traditional pipe and gutter systems. They're not really as used to this type of setup and this treatment system. And so there's a lot of lessons that were learned at this project, still functioning. It's got a mixture of traditional and these types of soft post-construction stormwater techniques, where we're really promoting infiltration through a lot of the soil that we've put in here, an engineered soil mix, but then the plants as well. And as they establish their deep root systems, they'll help with stormwater quality. This is your mayor's driveway. And this was through some cost share help, both actually at the state level. The state, IODNR, had set some money aside specifically for stormwater improvements and stormwater practices to be put in statewide. My parents put in a rain garden in little Malvern, Iowa, and southwest Iowa, and that was using state funds. And so there's a lot of these things that the homeowners can do as well. The final piece of this stormwater program, pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This is part of what we're doing here today for you guys. Just general stormwater awareness for municipal staff, but also we're spending some time with a few facilities. We're going to be putting together some facility runoff control plans for some municipal facilities, just to sort of help with pollution prevention. But a lot of different things that we can do out there. And it ranges from golf courses to public buildings. You've got water facilities, you got a swimming pool. All of these things have a potential pollutant source or sources, multiple sources. But there's an inherent risk with some more than others, obviously. I'm not as concerned about a library being a source of pollution as I am maybe that salt storage facility at the public works site, things like that. Typical examples, we might walk through a golf course, and we're just kind of assessing how things are going and potential pollutant sources. We might check to see if a floor drain in the main shop area is connected either to sanitary or is that going to be to the storm drain itself. And so that makes how they do things in there a little bit different perhaps. Washing out mower decks and all of that stuff getting washed maybe to an adjacent stream. Where they're doing that type of maintenance, how they're cleaning that up. That's something that we might assess at a golf course facility. Public works maintenance shops always are notorious for being probably the biggest potential pollutant sources are there. And you might see old facilities that are difficult to manage, or you might see brand new, shiny new facilities. We're just up at the parks and at the bus barn up on the north side. Beautiful facility and a lot of good things happening there. Municipal folks also manage and have a street sweeping protocol. And so you might have issues where we're identifying places where we've got little clogs and we've got to go into catch basins and clean those out. We can vac them out, a lot of different things. But a lot of different things go on into this program. And you can see that there's a lot of different hands in it, in all of those. So, some takeaways for you guys. What can you guys do to help? And this is just mainly as a citizenry, also a little bit as employees. As a citizenry, the first one I would tell anybody that you could do is if you've got a dog or you've got friends that have a dog, just encourage them, make sure that they're doing this. Your lawns, most urban lawns, after about a 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch rain event, they've taken up all the water they're going to take, especially if you've got a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, if you don't do things like soil quality restoration. They function a lot like your driveway after a certain period of time in a rain event, and they're going to take, all that water's got to go somewhere, and it's going to take everything on your lawn that it can and right along with it. Fecal coliform, bacteria from pet waste is something we as citizens can help try to corral. So pick up your poop. Look out for illicit discharges. There's only so many eyes that are in tune to this a lot of times. When I was working at the NRD in Lincoln, I kind of felt that nobody else was going to help me out a little bit to let me know when something was happening. Except when we'd have track out or something, and then everybody would call my phone. But it would really help. It would really help Amy and the program if we see some things out there that don't look quite right. Just tip somebody off to it. Call back here, let them know they can follow up, maybe do an investigation on it. If you see something kind of funky coming out of one of these storm drain outlets, it's got, it's foamy, it's a different color, it's got a funny smell to it. Those are all telltale signs that we might have an illicit discharge. So we want to know about that. This was just in my neighborhood, like last week. And I told my wife, I'm like, am I the only one that sees this stuff? I don't know. Maybe I am. But I've shown the picture to a few folks. Does anybody recognize what that is? Fertilizer? Yeah, that's lawn fertilizer. So they had a company come by. This was 2 houses down from me. Company came by, probably did their yard in about 5-10 minutes, and they moved on, and they were on to the next site. And they didn't bother to look back and see that they'd left a big pile of lawn fertilizer right in the middle of the street. That's a no-no. I don't want to see that, because that's all heading right to that guy right there, and we know where that goes. It's not getting treated. So I was out there with my little broom and dustpan, and I swept the darn thing up. Yeah, and I can go fertilize my yard with it, yeah. So when you do that, I mean, everybody, a lot of people do fertilize their lawns. I'm not getting away from that. We do encourage phosphorus-free fertilizer. Obviously, I don't know if there's a rule for that in Iowa yet or not. Phosphorus-free is the way to go. But if you do, just sweep it up off your driveway, get it back up into the lawn itself, off the sidewalks. Don't do that. We don't want to see that. If you see sediment in the public right-of-way, if it's really excessive, let somebody know as well. I know it's commonplace out there, but it's the largest source of pollution in the urban environment. It really is. So we want to make sure that we're addressing all of these things. If people are doing a good faith effort, that's one thing, but if a lot of their practices are showing some age, they've been run over, they never were there, those types of things, we want to know about them. Things like that, obviously a concern, so we want to make sure that we know that's happening. I believe the number in here, and I think I had the number on the other stick presentation, the number to get a hold of Marnie and who pass it on to Amy or whoever needs to, is 248-1720. Amy's got cards up here. If you see these types of things, she wants to know about them. Somebody wants to know about these things. So I think after all of this, you realize that it's not all on Amy's shoulders to make sure that this program runs smoothly. And it takes really all of us. I forgot to get transit in here. I got pointed out to that yesterday. Transit was like, they were talking to each other like, I don't think we have to do anything. I think we're not on there. Yeah, we're good. And I got streets on there twice, I believe. So
it's not on there. You don't want us to pick up hazardous materials anymore.
no, please do, please do. Don't let this be a slight to you guys. The point being that everybody sort of has a hand in here. It's not necessarily all on Amy's shoulders. Effective program implementation can't be the job of one person. Now, I will say Amy's done an incredible job here, and she's one of the most passionate people I know about this. And I know we get frustrated with how taxing this and frustrating this job can be, because for every one step forward we feel like we've made, sometimes the next day it's 2-3 steps backwards, and you feel like you're starting all over again. But it takes passionate people who care, and Amy definitely cares. So what makes the program successful is passionate people who believe clean water makes a difference to the well-being of their community. I would say it adds to the livability of Coralville. You've really got a lot of good assets, and you're making some great investments. Stormwater has been a priority here, and the rest of the state is recognizing that. I'm reading about it from Cedar Rapids. They want to use Coralville's stormwater program as an example. So there's a lot of good things happening, but it takes utilizing teamwork. It takes seeing initiatives through. That post-construction stormwater program is a classic example of that. Providing knowledge and education, not only to municipal staff, but out to the general public as well. It's people educating themselves on the issues and staying on top of things. You can't put your head in the sand, and Amy certainly doesn't do that. She's very active in a lot of different organizations, American Public Works Association, the Erosion Control Association I mentioned. So people who are educating themselves have a leg up, and they're an asset to their community. They start movements, they infect others with passion, and then they stand up for what's right when it's necessary. And there's a lot of, you can imagine with this stuff as it came down, the regulations came down, and small communities like Coralville put these ordinances and these programs together, there was resistance. And sometimes you kind of have to stand back and go, put that aside. A rule's a rule, but inherently at the end of the day, protecting our natural resources is the right thing to do. And it doesn't take me long to drive around this area, coming from where I'm from, and appreciate what you guys have here. It's really awesome. So we need you guys to help us spread the message a little bit. You've got a very, very active Facebook page, actually, City of Coralville. If you're not, if you don't like that right now on your Facebook feed, please go out there, hit like. We appreciate that. And one other step I'd appreciate. Every Wednesday, there's usually a water quality focused post. Hence, Water Quality Wednesdays. That's the new cool hashtag, if you didn't know. So Water Quality Wednesdays happen. They've happened a lot. I believe the fire department, who's the chief? You the chief? All right, so you're kind of a big deal when it comes to this stuff. You're a star. The last Water Quality Wednesday was your time-lapse video of the two-tiered rain garden. And it's very, very cool. And not a lot of people have seen a rain garden in action. You hear about it. You're like, well, it sort of kind of makes sense. But to actually see it happen in a time-lapse video is very, very cool. So that was the most recent one. That was last Wednesday. You've got the turtle story, which is very touching. You've got a great article in here that was written by Iowa DNR featuring the mayor's driveway. So there's a lot of good things. I encourage you guys, something that really helps spread Coralville stormwater message is to like and then share one of those posts with your network, if at all possible. Just one time. If you could do it on Wednesdays, that's great. We would really encourage you doing that. Yeah, there's the rain garden video right there, so check that out. But we reach a lot of people, and part of the stormwater, the program requirements, there's annual reporting that needs to be done. I'm sure Amy puts that together every January and February of the year. And EPA and the state want to know, how many people are you reaching? How are you doing your public education and outreach? How are you moving the needle on this stuff? And we can show some metrics just in our social media of how many people this reaches out to. So I think that's cool. And the more we can share that message out there on Wednesdays, the better. Something else to let people, yeah, go ahead.
I've received a call from the western side of the state.
Oh, did you? Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's not just a weekend project right there, was it? That took a little bit. Something else that's getting rolled out. You guys are probably one of the first groups to hear about it. Coralville has an official app now for your smartphones, and it's got a lot of cool features. Just an extension of the website, but it goes one step further up here. I wanted to point out, report a concern. You guys or your neighbors, family, whoever, can report a concern. So if we see some things out there like illicit discharges and you want to save a phone call directly to a number, you can use the app. You can even take a photo if you would like of the situation. So you can take a picture of that big pile of fertilizer in the middle of the street. Let somebody know about it, things like that. Very, very cool. So I hope that this has been somewhat informative for you, and I hope there's some takeaways of how you guys can contribute through your personal habits and actions at home, through your jobs, but also, I guess, a little bit more of an appreciation for the role of the stormwater program and how it fits into that equation of livability for the city of Coralville. So with that, I am wrapped up. Thanks for your attention. Any questions, comments, concerns for us or Amy?
How are those boxes on 5th Street and also around the intermodal gonna work?
Yeah, good question. And we were just taking a look at those yesterday, right? Yeah, they're bioretention cells. So those are actually going to work a lot like how a storm drain would work initially. It's going to take that water right off of the street. It's going to come in. It's an engineered soil medium that's down in there. Plants, they're going to have a set plant palette that's going to be in each one of those. Actually, a lot of those on either side of the right-of-way are connected in the right-of-way underneath through basically a gravel lens. And so you'll get transition of that stormwater going down each one underneath from cell to cell. Very, very cool design as it goes down through there.
It'll intercept the stormwater before it goes in the storm drain and get filtered down through the plants, mulch, the soil mix layer, and then rock underneath. And what we typically see in those systems is 90% pollutant removal of the urban pollutant loads. We're doing some monitoring with the University of Iowa to confirm that and get exact data on our practices here. But nationwide, that's what they're seeing for pollutant removal in those systems. Mm-hmm. And I have a little bit of follow-up just so you know. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Just so you know how the reporting a concern will work. But if you call our front desk staff, Dan Marney, they will forward your concern to me. I'll go out and investigate. I'll contact the contractor, make sure it gets cleaned up. If it's a really bad spill, we'll contact fire and maybe the streets department. They have equipment that can go in and vacuum out some of those pollutants. If it moves down to another storm drain, we can intercept it there. So we have a map that shows us, essentially we can chase it down, and we can probably get it out of there before it reaches the stream, if someone calls it in. If this is a habitual offender, a contractor that has known to be, do this multiple times, we may write them a citation. And, it's just, the idea of having 200 eyes out there looking at this stuff is going to be more effective than just me. And so that's kind of the whole idea. And, there's been times that I've been out driving and it's raining and it's cold and I see a concrete truck washing out in a storm drain and the guy doing it looks really mean. And I think, I thought I was going to have a good day today, But there's always this kind of voice in my head that says, if not you, who? And I would hope maybe that voice would come into your head too if you see anything. And you don't have to get out and approach him. Just call it in and I'll go out and talk with them. So any other questions? Okay, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.